got really quiet, almost like this is a library or something. All right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Cynthia Simpson, the Executive Director of Library Services, and delighted to have you with us today as we celebrate the scholarly and creative achievements of our faculty. The Lawrence Technological University Library is proud to support and showcase the research, writing, and innovation that thrives on our campus. Today's event is part of our campus's ongoing commitment to fostering a vibrant intellectual community, and we're honored to recognize the outstanding poetry of today's featured author, Dr. Vivian Cow. Thank you. So please enjoy your LTU library while you're here, and take a few minutes after the event to enjoy the photography exhibit if you have time. Dr. Jocelyn, would you like to come up and introduce Dr. Coe? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Much appreciated. It is a real pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Vivian Cow. I'm going to start with the facts, and then I'll just say a few things that are more personal. So Vivian Cow is an associate professor of English at Lawrence Technological University. She is the 2024-2025 writer-in-residence at the Buckham Fine Arts Project. Her book of poems, Dear Mrs. River Dragon, from Another New Calligraphy 2024, which she'll be reading from today, was a finalist for the Wheelbarrow Poetry Prize, so which is fantastic news as well. Her poems have appeared or will soon appear in Apricity, East Village Magazine, Press Pause, and the Louisville Review. She is also the author of Post-Colonial Screen Adaptation and the British Novel, which was published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2020, and co-editor of Writing STEAM, Composition, STEM, and A New Humanities, which came out with Routledge in 2022, and she lives in Flint, Michigan. I think those last two details say something about Dr. Cow's intellect and her intellectual achievement. When she went up for tenure a few years ago, it was clear that she had achieved scholarly esteem in not one but two academic fields, in the field of post-colonial literature and adaptation studies, as well as in the field of composition studies, because at LTU she's been the director of composition since she came here as a junior faculty member. And now, on top of that, she's added a really prestigious and growing body of creative work, which we are the beneficiaries of today. So, I think it's one of the testaments to the intellectual vibrancy that Ms. Simpson mentioned here at LTU, that we have colleagues who are doing this work in so many different fields, and it's just been a real honor to watch Vivian develop and grow in that space. I consider it one of my great professional achievements that I was on the hiring committee that brought her to LTU, so it's one of the things that I'm actually proudest of. So thank you for all you've given us, Vivian, and we really look forward to hearing from your book of poems today. Thank you.
Wow. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Paul, for the really lovely introduction. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you to the library for this awesome space, and to my wonderful colleagues. It just means so much for me to be here reading my poetry to you all. Thank you. I wanted to start today by reading from the very end of the book. This is my note to readers, which I had originally put at the front of this book. The book is called Dear Mrs. River Dragon. And when I was talking with my publisher, Bill Ripley at Another New Calligraphy, really he is Another New Calligraphy. He's this sort of amazing one-man show. He makes these all of his books by hand. He prints all the pages himself, cuts them all, glues them, and then embosses the numbered the number in the series. So this is number 2. I think he always keeps number 1 for himself. But it's really sort of all of these books are a testament to his craft. He also designs all the covers. But I was talking to him, and I had this note to readers at the very beginning, and he was like, why don't we put it at the end? and, let readers kind of come to the poetry first, and then have it contextualized for them at the end. But I think that for a reading, it's helpful to have it first. So I'm going to provide a little bit of context for the book and then read a few poems, and then we'll have Q&A, if that's okay. All right. So this is a poetry collection about being Asian American in Flint, Michigan, a city in which the Asian American resident population is nearly non-existent. The Flint River is as defining a symbol of the city of Flint as dragons are of Chinese culture. For me, the combination of these symbols takes the physical form of a ridge of metal rising up from the bottom of the Flint River, a leftover from the city's now obsolete industrial infrastructure. When I saw this ridge on a kayaking trip with my children, I thought it looked like the spine of an ancient and magical creature, a creature my own heritage could bring to this foreign land. The coming together of Chinese American culture and Flint, Michigan, two entities that could not be more estranged, is symbolized through this image and represents my own journey toward belonging in a city that, when I first arrived, had no place for me. I moved to Flint, it's 8 years ago in here, but really it's 10 years ago now. I moved to Flint 10 years ago with my husband and 3-year-old son, with little knowledge of Flint and never having visited, much less lived in, the U.S. Midwest. My husband and I were newly minted PhDs, and after a couple, 3 rounds on the job market, we decided to take the best deal we could get as dual career academics, a deal that happened to come from a university in Flint that offered him a tenure-track position and me a 1-year sabbatical leave replacement. Landing in Flint was ideal for my husband. As a political scientist studying radical left social movements, Flint's unique mixture of class and racial politics, grassroots organizing, and deindustrialization offered many opportunities for his intellectual stimulation and professional development. I, however, did not fit so naturally into Flint. Upon moving to the city, I immediately noticed the sheer absence of Asian Americans, especially East Asian Americans, anywhere in the city. At the grocery and convenience stores, at the gas station, at the farmer's market, at the art and science museums, at the parks and the restaurants. I've lived in places with few Asians and Asian Americans before, but being the single person who looked like me in what felt like the entire city limits was a new experience. Later on, I did meet several Asian Americans in the city and the surrounding area. But in the first months of moving to Flint, I really did feel like I had landed on an alien planet, only to realize that I was the alien. The poems in this collection deal with some of these early experiences, but they also chart how my relationship with the city, its residents, and my own self have evolved over the years I've lived here. I've tried to express how deeply humanizing and connective these relationships have been, without denying how dehumanizing and isolating they can be. The poems try to express the unique experience of being Asian American in the urban Midwest, the frustration, outrage, and loneliness, but also, and very importantly, the unexpected kindness of neighbors and the demand and hope of desegregation. So I'll start with the first poem in the book. This one, I feel like this is a good opener, both for the book and for any talks that I give about the book, because it kind of surfaces many of the themes that I talked about in the note to readers. And it's also about my very early experiences moving into my house in Flint. So this is called Asianopolis. Asianopolis. When I first moved to Flint, my house is sandwiched between the 2 other Asians in the city, the old Thai woman and the half-Japanese man, together with my very small half-Chinese son. We are 3. A downright Asian invasion, the neighbor across the street says. The Jews moved out and you all moved in. He laughs. I laugh because he wants me to. The old Thai woman is married to a Vietnam War veteran. He went to Asia to protect American freedom from the red peril posed by yellow people. He has palsy and lake blue eyes. But do they not look like your wife's brothers? He invites me into his home, which he has turned into a museum of Asian artifacts. Golden Buddhas, sitting in prone, lacquered bowls, teak tables. He has painted the lintels red and yellow. Maybe this is what he owes history, a burden he bears in the most civilized manner, not a weight, but a hobby. He keeps an immaculate yard, catches the beech trees' shed leaves before they hit the ground, nature's missiles intercepted, neutralized by paper lawn bags. He shows me the proper use of hedge trimmers. He is never without a kind greeting to me or a hello, young man, to my very small son. His wife cooks me the spiciest curry. My tongue is numb, my nostrils redolent. Every fragrance and salty, spicy, sweet, sour umami stewed and simmered into a Corningware offering. So this is how she does it, in this cold, gray, flat space they call a land, thousands of miles from home. I can barely follow her English. She says when she sees me with my very small son, "This you baby? My baby 50. I have never seen her baby, but she visits him weekly, brings him food. I realize it must be because I can't cook, that I feel so distant from my husband and son, even though we follow each other's English just fine. And I realize I can't cook because I have no homeland, whose tastes and smells I must bring into being before my heart breaks. Years later, after she and her husband have moved away, I hear from the expert on the movements of Jews and Asians that she died, leaving her husband to eat rice alone. I always thought he'd go first. I imagine the shape their love must have taken in the last few weeks, how he must have held her hand, though I never saw him do it, and stroked her forehead, though he never addressed her when other people were around, and told her she was the meaning and purpose of his life, but he must have. This year, I meet a Korean-American man and a Chinese woman, both younger than me, both trailing kids circling the ages of my own. Our numbers grow in this town by 150%. I feel the need to talk to them, to get to know them better, but I don't know what to say. Birds of a feather, only because we happen to rest on the same branch. Still, I walk my sons to the park under a canopy of red and yellow leaves and hope to see them when we get there. Thank you. So from that early memory, I kind of, became acclimated a bit to Flint. And one of the first things that you do when you move to a new city is that you put your kids in whatever school there is to put them in, right? So my son at the time was 3. This is my older son. So we put him in daycare. It's Montessori daycare. I had an experience at the daycare that reminded me of a very similar experience that my mother had with me back when I was a kid growing up in the 80s in Texas. And it had to do with the Mongolian spot. So I don't know how many of you know about the Mongolian spot, but it's usually like a sort of dark blue or brown patch of skin that's the result of hyperpigmentation. Almost all, I don't know if it's true that's almost all, but many Asian children are born with a Mongolian spot. And it's usually like somewhere on the thigh or on like the hip or the back or somewhere. And for a lot of kids, it's like very prominent, and usually it fades as you get older. So I had one, my older son had one, it is fading. My younger son does not have one. But it's a very common thing. And in the 80s, for this to be discovered by people in the school system was a very different experience for my parents than it ended up being for me in Flint. And so I thought I would sort of document, the difference, but also the similarity between these experiences in this poem. So this poem is called Mongolian Spot. I'll just say before I start that it has 4 parts. The first 3 are very short. The first 3 are written in the form of a haiku. 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. And then the 4th section is kind of more sort of free verse. So, Mongolian Spot. 1. Blue-black mottled bruise. How the ancestors find us across time and space. 2. Gugus shows itself from birth until puberty, then fades to browned cream. 3. Didi's stays hidden. No sign of half-moon shiner. They'll seek him always. 4. I had one until about age 10, a full moon circling my coccyx. I liked admiring it, backside turned toward the mirror, craning my neck, twisting at the waist to see it. A special patch I was sure none of my classmates had. Not a birthmark, but a birthright. I can't recall how the school nurse came to discover it. She confronted my mom about abuse. Confused and humiliated, my mother explained in her best Chinglish that all Asian peoples have one when they are a child, and it goes away when they grow up. Like a legal guardianship, or a rule that you can't ride your bike to the park by yourself, or a spinster aunt who takes care of her brother's children until they're allowed to stay home by themselves. Whatever my mother said, I guess it checked out. No charges were filed, no investigation conducted. I was not asked questions by a social worker that would have stayed in the back of my mind for the rest of my life. When Guga is in preschool, his teacher pulls me aside. I just wanted to ask you about something. Have you noticed a big bruise on his left thigh? It looks like it's spreading. She helps with toilet training. She does not suspect me, and I know she is earnest. I just didn't know, I don't know, other people maybe, I don't know. I know she has to ask, and I am grateful she is asking rather than concluding. I send a silent apology to my mother that this episode has turned out better for me than it did for her. I miss mine. I didn't notice it fading or diminishing, or whatever it did before it was gone. Like everything else Chinese about me, I reach for it when something reminds me of a thing I used to know when it's no longer there. Dependable old aunt that she was, she has packed up her best dresses that she never wore and set out for more hospitable climes. Thank you. So these next 2 that I'll read are about 2 main events, big events that happened, that have happened since I've moved to Flint. The first is the Flint water crisis, which very, very briefly was a crisis of contaminated water that went through our municipal water system, and people, families, children, everybody really was drinking lead and other contaminated water that was contaminated by lead and other materials for many, many months before we were told that we were, and before any measures were taken to kind of alleviate the situation. So I moved there. So the water crisis was sort of declared. It had been experienced for quite some time by community members, but the sort of crisis was declared, admitted to in the summer of 2015, and that happened to be the exact summer that we moved to Flint. This poem is sort of about our Flint water crisis experience. So I had my 3-year-old son back then, and lead is sort of most impactful on the developing brain and the developing body from ages 0 to 6. So this is called The Weight of Heavy Metals. When our test results come back, they say 6 parts per billion. Not much, but not nothing. We'd been using the same pitcher filter we used in New Jersey, where the water tasted worse than it does here. The taste of water, the taste of heavy metals. We pick up a faucet filter from the hardware store. Point of use, it is called. It does not fit our faucet, which is either ancient or foreign. The lady at the hardware store asks us which. Since it's me standing in front of her, she ventures a guess. We buy an adapter. It does not fit. We buy another adapter. It does not fit. We buy another adapter. It does not fit. We buy another adapter. It does not fit. We buy an adapter for our adapters. It does not fit. A stream of invective issues forth from my husband that I do not recognize as part of his repertoire. We buy gallons of water and put them in our basement for fear our kitchen floor will collapse from the weight, like the local newscaster has warned. The weight of water, the weight of heavy metals. We go to City Hall. We ask for a different faucet filter. Point of use, it is also called. It does not fit our faucet, which must be both ancient and foreign. We use an adapter we bought for the other filter. It does not fit. We use an adapter we bought for the other filter. It does not fit. We use an adapter we bought for the other filter. It does not fit. We use an adapter we bought for the other filter. It does not fit. We use the adapter we bought for the other adapters for the other filter. It does not fit. My husband's cursing becomes even more inventive. I am impressed. I unscrew a mysterious chamber of the faucet head we did not know could be unscrewed. It fits. It leaks from 2 places. We do not know if it leaks filtered or unfiltered water. My father-in-law comes to visit and installs an entirely new faucet, which is surely neither ancient nor foreign. It leaks from 2 places. My husband falls silent. We watch Guga for signs, who is not even Guga yet, because Didi does not exist, and we consider not bringing him into existence, given the circumstances. Is he acting out more, uncharacteristically angry, having trouble remembering, learning, thinking? Is he lethargic, depressed, speech development on track, numbers and letters, shapes and colors, peace over war, self-control over lashing out? But don't I want to lash out every moment? At the weight of heavy metals, which is the weight of not knowing, which is the weight of doing your best, which is the weight of so worried you forget how to be thankful, which is the weight of blame, which is the weight of fear, which is the weight of love, the weight of heavy love, the weight of the heaviest love. Thank you. One thing that I forgot to say before I read the last two poems is that I use the words Gaga and Didi in the poems. Gaga means older brother, and Didi means little brother. So I refer to the two of them as older and younger brother, the way that you would in any sort of Chinese family. So one kind of large event that happened since we've been in Flint has been the water crisis. The other is, of course, the pandemic. Who could forget? And the pandemic was something interesting that we experienced it in lots of different ways. But I think as an Asian American, as a Chinese American person living in the U.S. at the time, there was this sort of added complication of who you were and what you suddenly represented to your friends and neighbors and people around you, with the rhetoric that was coming from Trump during his first administration. Many of us, I think, felt afraid that we would be targeted, and in fact, it did happen to many Asian and Chinese Americans, that they were targeted as sort of public enemy number one for harboring, this virus and then bringing it into this country. Right? And so I kind of experienced this, a version of this in Flint myself, that took a very particular form. It's a particular form that involved local politics in a way that I found to be very interesting. And so I thought I would kind of document that experience through this poem. So this poem is called Cans of Chinamen. Cans of Chinamen. In the earliest days of the pandemic, when it was still just the Kung flu and the China virus, my husband sees a social media post made by a prominent black woman in the city. Chinese people are grinding up the dead bodies of their countrymen who died from coronavirus, packing them into tin cans marked corned beef, and shipping the cans to Africa. Stay away from corned beef, she warns, even if the can says it's from somewhere other than China. They are labeling the cans as coming from other countries to hide their origin. She asks her readers to share the post with all their contacts. It is very important. The last line of the post emphasizes Africa is the target destination for the cans. Emoji reactions range from the surprise icon to the laughing icon to the mad icon. In the comments, someone asks her to cite her source. It seems a bit far-fetched. One person says it's xenophobic. Someone else says this does not rise to the level of xenophobia, that the lynching of black people and the gassing of Jews was xenophobic. One person fact-checks the post with a link to an article. Another says it's disgusting and sickening. Another prays to God it isn't so and hopes it's a false rumor. One more person contributes a GIF of 3 old ladies with a hamburger bun sliced open on the table between them. No patty on the bun, just condiments. Where's the beef? The text says. I go see my son's school principal. I tell him about the post. But who would believe that? He asks. She is a prominent member of this community, I say. She works in the school system. He asks me to name her. I refuse. What would you like me to do? He asks. Being Chinese has been the biggest liability of my son's short life. Classmates already see only a China boy. Now they will think he's evil and has it out for Africans with whom they share grandmothers from the long ago before long ago. I do not tell the principal these things. I tell him I don't want him to do anything beyond keeping his eyes and ears open. Of course, he says, yes, I will do that. He is relieved I have not asked him to do anything real. Meanwhile, 1 million cans of Chinese chuck emerge from the Philippine Sea, skirt the Solomon Islands, round the coast of Australia, and make for the Indian Ocean. As the Chinamen drew their last breaths, on a ventilator if they were lucky, on dirty sheets in an 80th floor apartment unit if they were not, they thought, how nice it will be to see the sea. Thank you. So the last one I'll read is the title poem, Dear Mrs. River Dragon, and describes the river and the infrastructure that I talked about in the note to readers at the beginning. And this is the poem that closes out the book. Dear Mrs. River Dragon. On days when the river tide is low, and I am out in the kayak with my sons, I see your iron spine sticking out of the riverbed, vertebrae rising in undulating curves, folding over ripples of shimmering water, submerging once again under the factory floor. Rusted from decades of exposure to the gods of sky and cloud, your red bone, uncomplaining, waited as the waters changed direction and covered you, a secret from the sun. You tunnel through the heart of the city undetected, until boaters, floaters, swimmers finally look down and see their history, jagged and rent, twisted and decayed, disappeared by the captains of industry who stroked your scales long ago and said goodbye. You stayed here with the people, with the have-nots and the never-hads, the had and losts, with the will always need. The boys wrinkle their noses at you. What's that down there? The river dragon, I tell them, the ancestor of this city, who was sent from our own ancestors to keep and protect us. Whatever, Mom. The remains of one past is proof of another one longer, so very much longer, and no one knows but us. It's hot. I'm tired, hungry. Don't touch her, I say, not because I'm afraid you'll hurt them, but because your power is so boundless that even your love sometimes feels like it harms. You are to be respected, not disturbed. The boys think you're opening your jaws to eat us up, as you've swallowed the remains of vehicles, shopping carts, debris of all sorts, dead bodies, maybe. But these are not your victims. They are ours. Leftovers of capital, with nowhere to go but back into the body of time, absorbed into the maw of the ages, before east and west, man and woman, water and not. Many find it strange to see me here. My skin, my eyes, my face, my hair, we are not from this flat land so far from the sea, so far from the tea grown on the mountainside, from the pineapple plantations and the old fishermen, a land of green hills I have seen only once but forgot as I aged. But as you are inexplicably here, so am I. They have sent you to me, the gaos and lays and yous and chens, from the long ago before long ago, And so I know that while this place does not claim me, it is here that I belong. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am happy to take questions and do discussion.
Okay, I'll start. This was great. I'm really thrilled to have encountered the book first through your voice because I haven't read it yet, so that was really great. I guess I have two questions. The first is, could you talk a little about your history of writing poetry? If you had written poetry before this time, and then the second question, which is kind of related, is, the description of the circumstances around the book, both in your life and sort of historical, are just immensely fractured. There seems that there's so many kind of borderlines that are either opening up or you're experiencing. And I was just curious if poetry felt like a particularly apt way to address those things as a writer.
Yeah,
so two questions.
For sure. Yeah, thank you. Have I always written poetry? No. I think from a very early age, I sort of wrote creatively, I wrote stories, but I never really wrote poems, partly because I was always a little bit scared of poetry. Poetry can be difficult to understand. It can feel a little bit, even for somebody who has, kind of spent my life studying literature, sometimes it can feel like an exclusive club of people who understand poetry and people who don't are just kind of on the outside, right? Especially really sort of symbolistic or imagistic, poetry can be, difficult if you are not steeped in the traditions of those poems. And so, in my scholarly work, I don't write about poetry. I tend not to write about poetry. But when I was thinking of sort of documenting these early experiences in Flint, I set out kind of, thinking that I would write something. And at first I thought, well, I guess I'll just write essays because I am somebody who writes essays. But then when I would sit down to do it, the essays weren't coming. And what was coming was these lines of verse. And I thought that was totally weird. Because though I read poetry, like I said, I don't really work on it, right? And I teach it sometimes, but not as much as I teach novels or fiction or prose. And I just thought it was really weird. But I think people who do creative work of any kind know that you kind of have to honor the way that things come, right? So if you set out to do a drawing, but the drawing turns into a painting, then it's a painting, right? So I just kind of let that come. And I think this leads into your second question, Paul, because I think poetry is the form in which these memories and these stories and these attempts to understand this experience take, because of its sort of ability to leap beyond sort of logical steps, right? And to bring things together that normally don't come together or are very hard to explain when you try to do it in prose. There is a sort of logical, organized narrative way in which prose flows. But poetry doesn't have to do that, right? In a way, poetry can break some of those rules. And I felt like, the complexity of the experience of being a micro-minority in a minority-majority city required some kind of illogical leaps, right? And the poems are snapshots. They're little moments in time that kind of open out to larger conversations. And I feel like that's just the way that we experience life, right? I have another poem in here where it's called At the Liquor Store. And I'm at the liquor store buying ice cream for, my son's birthday. And I get, sort of heckled, which never happens to me. Never, ever, ever. But, I am a conspicuous person in my city. And it's winter, and I sort of, write about that experience, but I feel like, in prose, it would just be long and meandering, and I'd have to work in, like, sources about, the history of the Asian American community and the Black community, and then figuring out how to, like, pull all of those things together. But in poetry, it can be a moment that simply, like, indicates that is out there, right? So I kind of felt more free to document these experiences as poetry. Yeah, hold on.
So the river dragon.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about that image, because you're talking about two things coming together that normally don't come together. And so my understanding is that the Asian dragons are more serpent-like,
Yes.
and Western
Yeah.
dragons are more fire-breathing with wings and stuff like that.
Right.
So
Right.
that upbringing with that kind of dragon kind of made it easier for you to identify that in the river, right? Because,
Yes.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about that kind of perceptual similarity and things like that?
Yeah, in fact, so on the cover of the book, and there are books over there, I think, for you to peruse and buy if you want, but you don't have to buy them. So you can see on the cover, this is so this is like an artist's, the publisher's graphic rendering of a photo that I took of the like piece of infrastructure that I'm talking about. So if you go to Flint and rent a kayak and go kayaking on the Flint River, which you can do, when the water level is really low, which it gets quite low in the summer when we don't get a lot of rain and snow melt, you can see this running along like the center of the river bed, I guess. And it goes, quite a ways through the city, through the kind of like most industrial parts. So I assume it was part of like an old factory infrastructure that was then destroyed when the river was like rerouted in order to, account for flooding and stuff. So it literally, this is my original photo that he then made into graphic form and then washed it in this rust color to kind of, signal that sort of deindustrialization of Flint, Detroit, the kind of urban Midwest. So, so yeah, when I first saw it, the first thing that it reminded me of was the backbone of a serpent, serpent-like dragon, which, in Chinese culture, our dragons are nice. Our dragons are good. They don't hoard gold. Nope. They are. They're kind. They're protectors. They're essentially like. Sometimes you'll hear that they are the ancestors in sort of mythical form, but also they can be sort of sent by the ancestors to care for the descendants when they're gone. So. It's also the symbol of kind of imperial China. So there's that kind of power and leadership, the image associated with that too. But it's this sort of, I guess, caretaking idea. So yeah, that's the thing, that the image, made me think of that dragon's tail, like immediately. So, yeah. Yes.
At the liquor store,
Yes.
I just want to make a comment. You said that you felt conspicuous when you were in the liquor store,
Oh, yes.
but I don't think it had anything to do with you being Asian. I think if I went to a liquor store, because I know how they are, and I know how they are in the city, as a woman,
Yeah.
I would feel conspicuous. And I would know that they were going to say something.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to
Thank you for that, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because, you know, people might ask, I tell people about these experiences, and people, you know, who don't live in the cities that we live in, they're like, why were you at the liquor store? Like, why were you buying ice cream at the liquor store, right? And I was like, because that is the grocery store in my neighborhood. Like, we don't have another, you have to drive, you know, 15 minutes out of the city to get to a Meijer. So it's like, you know, 9 p.m. and the birthday party is tomorrow, and like I need the ice cream now, so the liquor store is just there. Since I wrote about that episode, a Family Dollar has opened up next to the liquor store, so now I go to the Family Dollar. But same thing, you know, people are like, why are you going there for your groceries? It's like, because that's where the groceries are, right? So it's
bougie now with your dollar store.
I know, exactly. Yes, they have wheat bread.
Upscaling, now the rent's gonna go up.
Yes, yeah,
Common question.
Yes.
Well, first of all, Vivian, you are an artist.
thank you.
You're an artist. And, you know, your this vulnerability, honesty, is truly palpable.
Thank you.
So the question, so as an artist, be comfortable with that vulnerability. How are you going to do it?
Yeah, I guess I think about this project as, in part, a kind of a way to document my own experiences and the experiences of my family, but it's not only that. Like, if it were only that, I would never have tried to get it published, right? It would just be for me, and like the poems could be there for my kids, whatever, you know. But I wanted to get it published because I felt like my story was part of a larger story, right? Even though Asian Americans are a micro minority in the Midwest, there are still a lot of us. That voice of Asian America, I felt like was sort of missing from the Midwest. Like, when you think of Asian America, you think of people living on the coasts, right? And especially California. And surely that is where the largest, you know, groups of us are. But there are still a lot of people living, you know, sort of silently, somewhat invisibly in the Midwest. And I felt like I was speaking to those people and also with those people, right? And so these are not experiences that are only my own. Like, I know that they're not, but I don't really hear them anywhere else. And so I wanted these to kind of speak for all of us. And so that's why I feel like the vulnerability is not just for me, it's for everyone, right? It's for speaking the story that, you know, I just feel like hasn't really been told, or at least just not very visibly. When I was communicating with this publisher, Bill, he said that, you know, out of all the manuscripts that he has read, he's never read stories like this from this place. So he's in Chicago, and so he's kind of, it's a big city, but it's also a Midwestern city, right? And he said, I never even really gave a thought to Asian Americans in the Midwest. So, yeah, so I guess it just, knowing that the personal is larger helps with kind of allowing yourself to be vulnerable on the page. So, yeah, thank you. Athena?
Selfishly, as a student, I took your class 2 years ago, which from your readers know, this was kind of around the time that you were, it sounds like starting with the pub trying here. I took my main course, which is Humanity and Technology. And based on your imagery, I was wondering if, as a professor who teaches a course like that, if that kind of influences or helps your writing, because in our course, my whole degree, we kind of look at those themes of like what the river dragon kind of represents for you personally, but I think 2 years ago we looked at that in a broader scope of like the whole progression and everything. So I was wondering if, as a faculty member who specifically teaches that type of subject, if that helps or if that kind of makes you reflect on it differently.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I mean, I feel like, you know, even though this is my first poetry book, the themes that I write about in here are not unfamiliar territory to me, right? So, like in my teaching, in my classes, in my scholarly work, you know, I write about, you know, cultural disconnect and cultural confrontation, you know, changing landscapes. So I think these ideas are very fluid, and so definitely I think that teaching, talking about those ideas with you guys in class, hearing your ideas, you know, it all gets kind of filtered in there, and then, you know, comes out in, you know, lots of different ways. So sometimes it comes out as poetry, sometimes as scholarly work, you know, sometimes as discussion and lecture. So yeah, I mean, I don't really see all of my projects as being extremely different from one another. I see them all as kind of working together. There are different projects because they're in different genres, but the concerns are the same, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Dan.
So thank you again. So a number of the poems capture these moments and the experiences you had in those moments. So I wonder what it's like for you now to read those poems again and perhaps again and again.
Yeah.
And whether you're re-experiencing it the same way or differently. How is that for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll say that, I guess I'll answer that in two different ways. When I read some of these poems now, I feel like, first of all, there's always the artist, like, oh, I should have done that, or I should have said that better, or that could have been better this way, or, you know, so there's always that. And so you know, I'm critical, more critical now about the poems themselves, I guess. But the truth of the experiences, I feel like, you know, it's not necessarily that I experience them again, but I am kind of dropped back into that moment, and I remember what that was like, but I can sort of see it with some distance, right? I can see that, I can see myself making choices in those moments, and remember what was going through my mind, and I think that's a really cool thing about, you know, kind of narrative poetry, because they do document like a moment in time. In the poems that I'm trying to write now, I'm trying to make them better poems, right? So when I was sending this manuscript out, and I sent this out to many, many, many publishers, and I got many, many, many rejections before I got, you know, one okay. But sometimes when you send stuff out, they just say no thanks, and then they, you know, move on. But sometimes you get comments back. Rarely, but sometimes you do. And in almost all the comments that I got back from reviewers, they said, love the poetic voice, love the honesty, and the you know, the some kind of earnestness, but you're not doing very much with the form. right? You're not really experimenting with form. And poetry should be formally experimental. And I was like, all right, yes, you're right. And so since the publication of this book, in my more recent poems, I've tried to experiment more with form. I've tried to force myself to kind of write, to practice writing in more traditional forms. I've written many very bad sonnets, very bad, very, very bad. I tried writing, villanelles, sestinas, these, kind of complex traditional forms, experimenting more with rhyme, with repetition, with alliteration, sounds, all of the sort of palette of meaning, I guess, that poetry has the ability to use that we don't use so much in narrative prose, right? So, we think about, you can read a poem and think about what it means metaphorically, but you can also think about how it means just in the sounds that it makes, right? You can track the number of k, k, k sounds or d, d, d sounds, or half rhymes, or sight rhymes, and all of those kinds of things that are very characteristic to poetry. So I've been trying to do more of that. I don't know how successful those have been, but you learn your craft as you go, right? So yeah. So in the poems since these, I've sort of had to teach myself to write poetry rather than kind of lean on the kind of intensity of the experiences.
So you mentioned starting writing prose and ended up writing poetry.
Yeah.
If you're trying to write poetry in certain forms, could it be possible that's going to morph into something else? Or is it the experimentation of, can I do this kind of idea in these particular forms? Is that
Yes,
the
it's
variation?
more the
Okay.
latter, yeah.
Okay.
And so I often have an idea of some kind of experience or something I saw or an idea, and I'll try to figure out like what is with the content that I want to communicate, what would be a good form for this to come out in, right? I wrote one recently kind of about being young and being in love, but also being very stupid, and as a teenager. And so I was like, what is the right form to talk about like young female desire? And I was like, maybe the Sapphic Ode. Sapphic odes are ridiculously hard to write in English. They're just weird. The meter is weird. 11 syllables instead of 10. It's really weird. But I was like, I'll try this, right? Because that form seems to match the thing that I want to say. And so, I've been trying to do more of those types of things. Very small, kind of intense experiences. I use the haiku, which I really love, and some sort of. I've also been experimenting with some Chinese classical forms, which are also very short and very, very rigid. So in describing, my experiences being a Chinese American girl and finding life somewhat rigid in, some parts of our culture, I try to use that form. So, yeah. Yeah.
Given all that the projection said, what I really like about your collection is that they are accessible. I can deal with the content of what you're saying without a whole lot of rigmarole.
Yeah, right, without knowing even too much about poetry, right? Yes, so part of the purpose of this collection, because it's so much about Flint and my experiences in Flint, I wanted it to be accessible to other residents, right? To my neighbors, to people who not only don't read poetry, but like don't read anything. I wanted them to be able to connect with these poems too and experience them. Because I do think at the end of the day, poetry is for people. It can be for different audiences, but I think that it shouldn't be a scary thing, right? I'm sad that I went for so many years being kind of scared of this genre. It is for people to read and understand and enjoy. So I think you can figure out ways to do that in more traditional forms. And maybe that's what I'm trying to do now. I wasn't a good enough poet when I was writing these to be able to make accessible content in more stringent forms. But I feel like I'm working on that. So, yeah, thank you. Jessie, I guess that'll be the last one.
Hearing and getting to read just the silken beauty of your words and the way you spoke, I think of Walt Whitman. And I don't think you should change line, regret a line. This was very beautiful. It was intimate, and I think it reflects a form of poetry that doesn't get enough recognition, which is more that hermeneutical self-talk, which we see in a lot more free verse. And I just really want you to maybe strip away any of the negative feedback and focus on this editor who apparently saw something so magical. I think that we would all agree is there. And I cried listening and just hearing you. I was actually tearing up back here, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jessie. Yeah, I'm grateful. Thank you. I've heard other, I listen to a lot of poetry podcasts because I drive a lot and I'm a nerd. So, but I hear, sometimes that kind of earnest, more narrative, kind of more prosaic free verse described as the American idiom. I don't know if you've heard that, Paul, but like this, it's a kind of an American style of poetry. And it, goes back to Whitman. But there is something kind of, American about it, like a plain speaking quality that speaks to sort of common people and common experiences. So there is, I like that, you see an American quality in my Asian American poems. So thank you. Thank you to everyone so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
So Vivian's too modest, 5 books, and there's cake and coffee and things like that. So please, if you have coming. Thank you again to the library for